Question. What's the first image that comes to your mind when you hear the name Pocahontas and John Smith? If you're anything like me, you're probably thinking of some sterilized Disney production back in the 90s, or some kind of Romeo and Juliet taboo romantic relationship between the Englishman and a native princess. The real story, however, is much different, but filled with all the intrigue, drama, and tragedy of a Shakespearean play. Today we're diving into the real-life story of two of America's first icons, brought to you by History Watch. John Smith was born in 1580 in the village of Willoughby, Lincolnshire, and raised by a farmer. Dreaming of adventures outside the confines of his rustic upbringing, he decided to join the military, where he fought across Europe for 5 years and excelled at feats of bravery and martial prowess, including the killing of 3 Turkish champions with his bare hands. He returned to England in 1604, and having sufficiently proved himself in combat, but yearning for greater accolades, he decided to join a new expedition heading to present-day Virginia to establish an English presence in the New World. Now, prior to the English's arrival, a conglomerate of several tribes in the tidewaters of Virginia, called the Powhatans, had experience already with the Europeans, namely Spaniards, sussing out that these strange foreigners weren't coming just to visit. Their eyes were poised in search of landed treasure. After fending off the invaders, the Powhatans realized that to repel further intrusions into their country, they needed to fortify their power base. It was at this exact time that the English washed ashore. John Smith was just one of several leaders in the group, but being the headstrong individual he was, he set off with 2 companions to explore the interior of Virginia. The 3 traveled along the Chickahominy River, but were soon caught in a trap by the Pamunkey tribe. After killing Smith's 2 companions, the tribe decided to spare him after he pulled out a compass and demonstrated its peculiar qualities to their leader, Opechancanough. Luckily for Smith, he was treated well by his captors, who wished to trade information with him in order to find out more about the English and their intentions. After several weeks in native hands, Smith was allowed to visit their great chief, Wohonsonaca. The scene that awaited him was dramatic, as Smith passed hundreds of warriors crowded outside of a house into which he was funneled. And there he met the great chief, who impressed Smith with his, quote, grave and majestical countenance, end quote. The chief questioned John Smith on the Englishman's travels into the Powhatan's land, and offered rations and supplies in exchange for copper and iron goods. To solidify this newfound relationship, there followed a ritual whereby John Smith was to be sent to his execution, and at the last minute, the king's daughter, Pocahontas, comes out and lays her head upon Smith's to save him from death. While Smith's writing describes the events in dramatic terms, it most likely was a staged incident meant to symbolize Smith's rebirth as a dual member of the chief's people and the Englishman's. Although popular sources would like us to believe there was a romantic connection between the two, it's highly unlikely. The princess was only 10 years old at the time, while John Smith was nearly 30. Instead, this meeting would prove significant in other ways, as it began a year-long period where the Powhatan princess would shuttle back and forth between Jamestown and her tribe, coming face to face with an alien English society and developing a relationship of sorts with Smith, who once called her his, quote, dearest jewel and daughter. After his first introduction with the Powhatan leader, John Smith seemed poised to establish himself as the major deal-maker between the English and natives. Indeed, for the next year and a half, all major negotiations included Wohonsonaca, John Smith, and Christopher Newport, one of the Virginia Company's ship captains. Despite these auspicious beginnings, rivalries and distrust between John Smith and the other leaders of the colony unraveled the delicate alliance. Many thought it suspicious that John Smith returned unscathed while his 2 companions were killed. No matter how vehemently he denied these accusations, Jamestown's leadership never ceased to question his loyalty. The black cloud that formed around him came to a head in 1609 when, while sleeping aboard his vessel on a return journey back to Jamestown, John Smith was awakened quickly by a violent explosion from his powder bag. A lit match had found its way into the boat, burning, quote, his flesh from his body and thighs 9 or 10 inches square in a most pitiful manner. The tensions which hung over Smith's relations with his fellow countrymen had now evolved into an assassination attempt. With little time to waste, Smith jumped into the dark water and was fished out, barely clinging on to life. Miraculously, he recovered, but amidst written accusations from several of the colony's leaders describing Smith as hell-bent on one-man rule and desiring to, quote, have made himself an Indian king by marrying Pocahontas, end quote, among other abuses, Smith was sent back to England and barred from working with the Virginia Company again. Quite suddenly, this man who was a leading force in the political arena of England's first American settlement had been reduced to a shadow of his former self, an unceremonious end for the former soldier. Relations between the English and Powhatans would also devolve, this time into all-out war. Curiously, Pocahontas would also once again play a role in pacifying the bloodshed. In 1613, she was invited by two fellow natives aboard a ship manned by the English captain Samuel Argall. Seizing the opportunity for a ransom, Pocahontas was ordered to stay on board the ship and used as a pawn in exchange for English prisoners. Until her release, she would be sent to Jamestown to live with the English. However, weeks turned into months, and the princess's father made no apparent effort for her speedy return. The princess was considered a captive but was treated well by the English. There was a mutual curiosity in the novelty of each other's culture. She learned the language and began attending church services. In the pews during crowded sermons, she met John Rolfe, an Englishman, and the two decided to marry. It was obvious Rolfe had some concerns about wedding someone from a, quote, barbarous race, but alleviated his anxieties by turning to a religious theme, once asking what purpose he had, quote, if not to labor in the Lord's vineyard, there to sow and plant, to nourish and increase the fruits thereof. On the other hand, Pocahontas' thoughts on the union, unfortunately, aren't known. What is apparent is that England embraced the chief's daughter as something on par with a celebrity when she touched down on the other side of the pond. She and her new husband were accompanied by an entourage of relatives and other young Powhatan women who attended the princess. London was practically buzzing at their arrival in a strange mixture of fascination and disgust. The couple were feted by the upper crust of society and whisked away to join, quote, plays, balls, and other public entertainments. The apex of her grand tour came when the king and the queen invited John Rolfe and his bride, the newly christened Lady Rebecca Rolfe, to the ornate banqueting house to join what is known as a masque, a form of courtly entertainment with dancing and acting. How wonderful, strange, and exciting this all must have been to the 18-year-old Pocahontas, raised in the tidewaters of Virginia, and now decked in the most expensive of fabrics seated beside the royal couple, overlooking jostling courtiers, powerful dignitaries, and the flowing shapes of masked actors. Ironically, amidst the spectacle of the natives' tour of London, John Smith was nowhere in sight. His fall from grace with the Virginia Company had prevented him from returning to Jamestown and reuniting with Pocahontas. Instead, Smith's restless spirit brought him further north across the Atlantic to the coasts of Maine and Massachusetts Bay, naming the land New England in honor of his country. If Smith desired to see the young princess he had first met years ago, that wish would not come to fruition. In March 1617, on a return voyage to her ancestral land, Pocahontas contracted an illness soon after departure and died before the ship left England. Just past the age of 20, she was buried at St. George's Church in Gravesend. Despite the abrupt end to her young life, Pocahontas serves as an enduring image in American history. During a period of strife, she represented both literally and figuratively the communion, if short-lived, between two opposing worlds. Alternatively, we have John Smith, a battle-hardened adventurer who, through actions brave, deceitful, and callous, blazed his own trail in this new land, and as a result paved the way for the creation of an entirely new nation. Recently, I had a chance to visit Jamestown, driving southeast into the swampy marshlands that once were home to various Powhatan tribes. Nowadays, there are no more villages or people in them. The only signs visible are on the names of certain landmarks and areas. To look out in this land that saw so much bloodshed and destruction is haunting. And though I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, there's a certain sorrowful energy permeating this part of Virginia to this day. It was a strange feeling entering Jamestown's historic site on a hot and humid September day and walking through the air-conditioned building that houses the museum. This modern hallmark of civilization standing where centuries ago a band of English settlers landed ashore. After exiting the building, I felt this heavy air settle around me as I walked toward the side of the fort, imagining what it must have been like to acclimate oneself to this climate in clothing suitable to England's more temperate environment. Despite my mixed feelings about how this land was won, This gave me a greater appreciation of the hardy men and women who made the journey across an entire ocean to a as yet undiscovered country. Though many years have gone by and muddied the water of our recollection, the chapter of Jamestown is fundamental to our history, and one without which the course of the United States may have ceased to exist altogether. Well, that does it, folks. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.